friends, I have some reading updates for you today. I'm going to be talking about books that I read or started during my vlog, and then some other things that I've started more recently, some that were a bit of a surprise to me, a little spontaneous, so that's fun. But yes, so the first book I'm going to talk about is The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore, which if you watched my vlog, you know that I went on and on about it. I gushed at length. But yes, I really enjoyed it. It is definitely one of my favorites for the year so far. So this book is about Terare, a real figure in history who became infamous for having a ravenous appetite and for being able to eat inedible things and all kinds of strange things. And so this book creates a story for him because there aren't really a lot of real facts that survive about him. And so it explores the idea of whether monsters are born or if they are made. And it does it in a really beautiful way. I really enjoyed the humor and the juxtaposition of beauty versus grotesque going on in it. The writing is beautiful and very evocative, poetic and a bit abstract at times. And then it also has this subversive social commentary that I thought was woven into the story in a very seamless way. And I really enjoyed that as well. And in the afterword, the author mentions that one of her inspirations for the book was The Passion According to G.H. by Clarice Lispector, which really put Lispector back on my radar because previously the only thing I've read by her is The Hour of the Star, which it didn't really work for me. I wasn't able to appreciate it for what it was. So The Hour of the Star is about a young woman named Macabea who is living in abject poverty. She is meant to be at least the focus of the story, but the narrator is an author, a fictional author that is a male author, meant to not be Lispector, I guess. but this narrator, the author, is such a looming presence. They keep interjecting in the story and bringing their difficulty in telling the story and their feelings about the character in a way where it's like, I just want to learn about Macabea. What are you doing? Go away. I don't care about you. Is how I kept feeling about it. And I feel like, I don't know, I suppose that's the point because it's very, purposely done, but it just didn't really work for me. So I don't know, that's a big aside, but who knows? Maybe that's something I can come back to once I've maybe read more Lispector and maybe I can appreciate it more. But regardless, so this made me very interested in reading The Passion According to G.H. And that's always fun when you learn about books that you're interested in from ones that you have read. I love when that happens. So yes. Okay, the next one is going to be The Pillow Book, which I listened to on audiobook by Shonagon. And this is a collection of miscellaneous writings written by a court woman in Japan in the 11th century. So it's got poems, lists, and diary-like entries, and I just really enjoyed getting to know Shonagon as a person, getting to know her quirks, her taste, and her wit. She has such an eye for beauty, especially in nature, but then she's also gossipy and confident and opinionated. It was so much fun getting to know about someone in a rather intimate sense, while also learning about details of court life at the time to sort of contextualize society of the time. And that combination was just fascinating. The fact that this survives and we can get such an intimate look at someone living at that time. I love how, despite the differences of customs and traditions of the time, how relatable it feels. That was my favorite part. And I found it very easy to listen to because audio. And yeah, it's just crazy that it has survived for so long. It's one of those things that makes me go, humans are cool. The next book is The Painter's Daughters by Emily House. And I really enjoyed this quite a bit. but I do have some criticisms. So this is about Thomas Gainsborough's two daughters, and he was a famous portrait painter in England in the 1700s. So this follows the story of Peggy and Molly and their relationship. And Molly had a form of mental illness, something that might be diagnosed as schizophrenia nowadays. And so she would have episodes where she would say and do incomprehensible things. And I think it's important to point out that we only get to hear the story from Peggy's point of view. So it's really her story, her experience, which is a minor gripe of mine based on the title, but you know. So I'm going to start with the things I enjoyed. So my favorite section of the book was probably the first third, where we get to see the family circle and we get to know the different family members and the ways that they interact with each other, the ways that they learn to orbit around each other. And I think it's a very important part of the book because it really shows how it is that Peggy formed into the person that she becomes as a teenager and then as an adult. And it informs the way that she views her little world and her goals in life. And I think it was done really beautifully. The second half of the book definitely changes in pace. It sort of picks up the pace and progresses the story a lot more. And as the story progresses, we get to see how Peggy's love and care is a bit of a double-edged sword, because as much as it is very loving and coming from a good place, it also becomes very stifling and controlling. And there are some really poignant moments towards the end of the book that address this directly, and they're very moving. So I thought that the exploration of Peggy's character was really well done, and I really enjoyed it. At the same time, I think that there was so much room to explore Molly's character a lot more. She feels a little bit like a ghost in the story. She's quite absent, except when her mental illness is relevant to things happening in the story, and that's really a shame. And you could argue that it's done on purpose, but to me it just feels so much like a cop-out. It's such a cliche to make a disabled character silent or not allow them to speak or have a personality beyond their disability. It's basically withheld until the end, towards the end of the book, when she finally has a moment where she speaks up and says that she has personal motivations too. And even in the way that Peggy talks about her, we just never really get to know her as a person, her personality and characteristics, which might point to Peggy not knowing her sister as well as she thinks, but I just don't buy that. I mean, if you live with someone pretty much always with that person every single day, you would know general things about their character and their personality. And another thing that I haven't mentioned is that every few chapters, there will be a chapter from the point of view of the girl's grandmother. And it follows the story of how she came to have their mother, which is a story in itself, which if you look up their family history, you can get a glimpse of what that is, but it's kind of fun to not know. And so something else that the book explores is, and this is where the grandmother sort of becomes relevant to this, is the idea of how the Gainsboroughs are raising their daughters. Because throughout their life, they end up going sort of back and forth between whether they want to raise the girls to marry into money and not have to work, versus teaching them something that can turn into an occupation should they need it. And so the grandmother, towards the end of the book, ends up becoming a very sort of feminist, empowering kind of figure, because she's depicted to fight very hard to provide her daughter with the means to live well throughout her life. And so this ends up really contrasting with the Gainsboroughs, a lot more sort of ambivalent parenting. And so where this kind of didn't work for me is that you reach the climax and you are watching the climax of the grandmother's empowering story of motherhood at the same time that you're watching the sister's heartbreaking story about sisterhood and the unfair treatment of a mentally ill person. And it just made it difficult to feel like either one had enough impact. They sort of detracted from each other for me. I feel like the book would have been stronger if it could have decided to prioritize one over the other and just run with it fully. But probably my biggest problem with this is that it just felt so obvious to me that Molly's perspective should be in here as well, to, add nuance and contrast to her sister's experience, and to develop her as a character beyond her mental illness and beyond the way that her mental illness affected others. And I think it could have been used to develop the story in interesting ways too. It could have been done unconventionally with like poems or diary entries, a third person point of view, something like that. And it would have just made a lot of sense to have that in there based on the title itself. I just feel like it's a really big missed opportunity. And my preference would have been to just focus on the sisters' experiences. And so, I would have preferred to have Molly's perspective in there rather than the secondary story about the grandmother. So next up, I have The God of Endings by Jacqueline Holland. And guys, I DNF'd this one. Yes, so I want to talk about why, and I have lots of thoughts. So this book has a dual timeline. It starts out with a little girl being turned into a vampire in the 1830s in New York. And then it skips to the future in the 80s in New York, where the same vampire girl, Colette, is now a teacher, an art teacher for children. And I do think that a lot of people would enjoy this. It just ended up not being for me. So one of the least important things that sort of grated on me a little bit was that Colette has a past love that she talks about with very pining kind of language. And I just personally don't like when characters are very kind of stuck in that limerence. So not a deal breaker, but that was a small thing in there. So a much more important reason is that Colette is supposed to be over 150 years old, and she just has this very extreme negative view of the modern world, modern times, and she really, really idealizes her past. I suppose because she was happier in the past, but it just comes off immature in a way where it makes me lose believability for the character, because she works with very young children, and so she'll have moments where she's looking at the children and she'll say, oh, if they could see like the atrocities I've seen, children experiencing all kinds of violence and awful things, when those things that she is picturing are things that have been directly improved by the progress of time, with medicine and technology and laws. And so it stood out to me a lot, it kind of grates on me. And maybe that becomes part of her character development, but I just don't like that choice personally. And the other big reason is that there is so much telling, not showing going on in this book. I think that is also part of the reason why it's kind of long. And I saw in reviews that some people complained that there isn't enough plot, which I find interesting because I think it is meant to be character driven, but there actually is a lot of plot. It's just a lot of descriptions of kind of unimportant things unfolding very, very slowly. And so it's not pacey. Things don't develop quickly. But the other thing is that you have two things that seem to happen mostly separately. So you'll have the moments when you are listening to Colette's thoughts, and those let you know about her personality, the way that she thinks and the way she sees the world. And then you have the moments when she's describing plot, and those plot moments really only seem to affect the immediate result of what is happening. And so this really stood out to me as I was reading The Painter's Daughters at the same time, because that beginning section of The Painter's Daughters does such a great job of interweaving interactions that communicate so much more than that immediate interaction. You learn so much about the characters, their background, their personalities, their relationships to each other, all these things so seamlessly. And so that's what I didn't see here. There was the separation between developing character and developing plot. Noticing these things really made my interest come down a lot. And, this is a debut, so the author has time to develop her writing style, but for me, this just didn't work out. The The next book I'm going to talk about is going to be Cartucho by Nellie Campobello. And I'm actually still going on this one because I'm reading it slowly. I'm only reading a few stories at a time because it's a pretty heavy subject. This is made up of vignettes focusing on men, mostly men, who were killed during the Mexican Revolution between 1916 and 1920. And it's all told through the point of view of a little girl witnessing and hearing about these different people. And each story is very short, but they're quite harrowing. It's pretty gruesome and violent. And so, yeah, I'm only taking a few at a time. And it's really heartbreaking to see that level of violence get normalized for a child. But it's also a really interesting way to become familiarized with a historical moment in time. And so, yes, I am enjoying it in, the ways that something like this can be enjoyable in small doses. So the next book is one that I haven't talked about yet on my channel, but I've been reading it for a little bit. It's River East, River West by Aube Lescure. And this one has been shortlisted for the Women's Prize, and I actually found it through Jen Campbell, who posted a vlog recently. She had a baby a few months ago, and so she hasn't been posting a lot, but she posted a vlog and she read through the shortlist. And I want to say this was her favorite, or at least the one that she seemed to recommend the most. And so I thought I would give it a try. It also fits into the historical fiction theme for the readathon for the month. So this book starts out in 2007 following Alva, who is a young half Chinese, half American girl born and raised in China. And she is at her mother's reception because she is getting married to their landlord. And we later learn that Lu Feng, the landlord, and her mother had actually known each other in the past before she was born. But she doesn't get to learn about this until later. At this point, she thinks that her mother is marrying him for his money. And so Alva's mother, Sloane, is a white American woman who has been living in China for many, many years. And we also have Lu Feng, who is the landlord, and he is Chinese, grew up in China in a time full of turmoil that shaped his life in ways that were out of his control. And so we get to learn about the three characters through Alva, starting in 2007, and through Lu Feng going back in time, I want to say to the 80s, and following his story as well. And the main thing that really hooked me about this book was the themes that it was exploring. The idea of being a citizen of a certain country and really wishing that you could be a citizen of a different one. And so it explores themes of American idealism, exceptionalism, white privilege, and politics. And also status and privilege are a huge part of the book as well. And the fact that the point of view is taking place outside of the US is very interesting to me. And so you have these different cultural points of view. Alva is mixed race, and so she feels like she doesn't really fit in anywhere. But given that she's only lived in China, she really, really has this idealized idea of what it's like to be an American and live as an American in America. And she is looking for ways to have that experience. And then you have her mother, Sloane, who is very disillusioned with America and really idealizes living in China. But of course, her preference comes from the fact that as a white person in China, she has a certain level of privilege that she benefits from. And, she appreciates when she benefits from it, and she definitely does not enjoy it, when men are just trying to use her. And then we have Lu Feng, who probably ended up being the most interesting character to me. He starts out with a lot of dreams of being an intellectual and going to school, and his plans get entirely derailed because of political reasons that entirely derail what he wanted to do in life. And so he ends up, for most of his life, with this balancing act between wanting to be happier versus conforming and finding happiness within the hand that he's been dealt. And at one point, the book also mentions movies. It mentions Eyes Wide Shut and a Chinese play, I think, Farewell My Concubine, which was made into a movie with Leslie Chung. And this idea of what they call a very Chinese sentiment of longing for something you can't have. And then also this idea of alienation, of this sort of consciousness of the part you're playing in a certain environment. Sort of thinking about those things within the context of the book was really interesting. The sort of roles we play in society, or when we're in certain groups or surrounded by certain people. And this idea of sort of becoming conscious of our performance, I found so interesting. And then with that idea of longing for something you can't have, and Leslie Chung, which made me think of Wong Kar-wai movies and how they always have such a strong feeling of longing. And I am very much going on a tangent here, but it made me want to watch those movies and explore those themes more. But anyway, but to go back to the book, I haven't actually finished it. I am not quite 3/4 of the way through, but at this point, as much as I find the themes really interesting, the plot is not as interesting to me as I wish it was. And so I think what I'm going to do is figuratively put it aside, because it's an ebook, and sort of let it sit and see if my interest in sort of picking it back up comes back. So the next short story specifically that I want to talk about is one that I picked up also kind of spontaneously because I was watching a video made by Hannah from Hannah's Books, where she was talking about A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor and comparing it to Stephen King's On Slide and Road. I was like halfway through the video. The way that she was talking about the plot for A Good Man is Hard to Find just had me so hooked. I was like, I gotta pause and go read this story. And so I actually grabbed the audiobook that also has some other short stories in there and listened to it, and then came back to the video. But I loved it. I loved the story so much, and I really enjoyed her video on it too. So I highly recommend you watch her video if you're interested or have read the story. I was actually so blown away that I couldn't help myself, and I just immediately ordered the complete short stories. So now I have this as well to explore later on. But for now, I'm just continuing with the other short stories that are in the audiobook. And so for this story, we are following a family of 4, plus a grandmother and a hidden cat on a road trip, while a group of murderers is on the loose. And I think the less you know, the better. And it's just shocking and sharp and funny. You've got Southern manners and moral hypocrisy. And her treatment of her characters is merciless and scathing. I would not want her judging my sins. She just really digs deep into the fallible human heart and casts some harsh judgment. And apparently that's my new favorite thing. And so this came at a great time because I've been recently getting very interested in exploring the Southern Gothic genre, which is very, very new to me, but seems like it might be very up my alley. And yes, so I would really like to also check out some Faulkner soon. And so I'm not done with the audiobook yet, but I think I am more than halfway through. Yes, and so I'm still going on the audiobook with the rest of the stories and enjoying those as well. And I really do think that they're the kind of stories that are just so loaded with meaning and nuance that they really benefit from close reading. And so I'm really glad to have that full collection of stories to also go back to and take my time with at a later time as well. So we're moving on to books that I have started most recently, and the first one I want to talk about is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. And you might have seen this in my last video, my summer book recommendations, and I mentioned that I wanted to reread this, and so I am. And I am very happy to be back in it with Stevens. So this follows a butler named Stevens in England in the 50s, and he is taking a 6-day road trip while his employer is away from home. And this is all about the time that he has to really think back on his life and consider things. And so it's all about the things that he ends up learning about himself and about the world while he's on this trip. He has a lot of time to think about his past and reminisce, and he has a lot of time to think about whether his life's dedication has been worth it. and it's heartbreaking and insightful and layered. Something that I really love about Ishiguro's writing is how easy it is to kind of read between the lines and get something out of what is not being said. It's really interesting to be a spectator to the main character. So I'm very happy to be reading this again because it's definitely an old favorite of mine. Another book that was a bit spontaneous, unplanned, is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buell. And this is medieval horror, fantasy, historical fiction. I suppose an unusual pick for me. Maybe not so recently. I don't know. But the reason that I picked this up is because my husband just finished reading this and he enjoyed it so much. He suggested maybe I could try it and then we could talk about it. And I don't actually know too much about this going in. So yes, I'm going in pretty blind. But let's see. It says, a brutal knight offered one final chance at salvation. A troubled priest, last survivor of his parish, drowning himself in wine and guilt. A young girl, orphaned by the Black Death, obeying the commands of angels, both terrible and beautiful. This trio will undertake a journey across a medieval French countryside decimated by war and plague, encountering along the way martyrs and saints, brigands and fools, the damned and their hellish masters. They have little chance to save mankind, but they might, just might, save their own souls. Yeah, so I'm only one chapter in, but so far I'm enjoying the writing and also the kind of dark humor in there as well. And the last book I'm going to talk about is another one that I mentioned in my last video, and it is Inu Yasha. So this is a manga and very nostalgic for me because this was an absolute favorite of mine when I was a kid. I love the anime. And so this follows Kagome, who is a young girl who jumps down a well at her family's shrine and finds herself in feudal Japan, where she accidentally shatters a secret jewel that scatters throughout Japan. And so she must join forces with a half demon dog, half human to retrieve all the fragments before demons, monsters, and humans alike can get their hands on the fragments and cause all kinds of trouble. And it's just great. It's really funny. And the main protagonist is so good. She's such a good heroine. She's confident and feisty and she stands up for herself, but she's also humble and kind. Yeah, I love her. And then I also love Inu Yasha, who is rude and cocky and a bad boy who is constantly put in his place by women. And so picking this back up is reminding me how much I enjoy manga, how easy it is to read. I was watching a Steve Donoghue video the other day and he was saying how for him, Regency romances are his palate cleanser. He loves them. I love that fact so much. And it got me thinking how manga could really serve that kind of purpose for me too. Like I consciously inject it into my reading that with that purpose because I don't tend to prioritize manga that much. But like I said, I love it, and so I really should. And it can be my palate cleanser. So yes, that is it, you guys. I am so happy with all the stuff that I'm reading. I'm enjoying how varied my reading is lately. It's just keeping my interest up, because I can go between these different things and not lose interest in anything. It's also making me crave other genres that I haven't been reading as much of, and that's exciting as well. In past years, my reading has really slumped in the middle of the year at times, and that's not happening, which I'm not surprised. I just started my booktube channel, and so it's all very exciting. But and I think it's totally fine to take breaks from reading or to slow down your reading and prioritize other hobbies, other things you like to do. But it's fun that that's not happening for me right now. It's fun to be very into reading and wanting to do it all the time. And then, the last thing I wanted to mention is, if you watched my vlog, you would have known that I really wanted to make and have some banana bread, but my bananas were not ripe enough. But I finally did make some last weekend. I will put up a picture so you guys can see how it came out. And it was so good. My husband and I ate it throughout the week. We also shared some with my mother-in-law, and it's now gone. And it was great. So that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any thoughts on any of the books I mentioned, or if based on anything I talked about, you have any recommendations for me. Please let me know. Please let me know. And yes, I will see you next time. Bye.